Alright, what's going on you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. In this video, I want to compare Nick Walker against William Bonac and then also a little bit against Akim Williams because I believe they will be the top three at the Olympia. I think Akim is going to win, and I think there's going to be a pretty good battle between Bonac and Nick in that 2 and 3 spot. Now, personally, in my predictions, you guys may have seen the prediction video I posted a couple days ago already. Right now, I'm predicting Nick in third and Bonac in second. I think Nick and Bonac are very similar in a lot of ways. They're both shorter guys with a ton of muscle, a ton of density, but they're kind of compact. They're not the most aesthetic physiques, but they both have a ton of muscle. So when you compare Nick and Bonac, there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences as well that I think Bonac's physique really highlights well. So starting out with these first couple of pictures here, we're looking at 2 front double bicep shots. One of the things that I want to point out is Bonac has a lot of finer details to his physique. And when we get to the back shots, you guys are going to see that a lot better. But the thing that Nick has over Bonac, while they're both densely muscled, they've got a ton of muscle packed onto a shorter frame, Nick out-muscles him. And that's hard to do. Nick is really overwhelming a lot of current IFBB pros with just a ton of size, and I think that's one thing he has over Bonac. But when you look at Bonac's physique, you can see a lot of those finer details, especially in the lower body and in some of the back shots. So that's one of the things that we're going to get to in this video, and you can kind of see that in this front double bicep pose. Even some detail in the arms, the biceps themselves, that Bonac has that Nick doesn't. But again, your eye is drawn to Nick because he's so densely muscled. He's such a freak. You automatically just want to look at him, even if Bonac is a little bit sharper, which I believe he was. And by the way, we're comparing here the 2020 Olympia version of Bonac to the 2021 New York Pro version of Nick Walker, because that was both of their most recent showings. So I think that would be the most fair comparison. And because Bonac on paper is really the favorite to win the show. He's the highest Olympia placer, and he's the highest Arnold Classic placer going into this show, 5th place at the Olympia, and he is the returning champion for the Arnold Classic in bodybuilding. But let me give you guys a better idea of what I'm talking about here. Let's flip it over to the back double bicep pose. In this shot, this is a shot that I would certainly give to Bonac over Nick. Now, look at the detail that you can see, particularly in the mid to lower back area in Bonac versus Nick. There's a lot of detail and density there, to be fair. I think Bonac's back is significantly more filled out than Nick's. It's thicker, it's denser, but it's more detailed as well in that mid to lower area where Nick's is not. And then if you look at Bonac's lower body, his glutes and his hamstrings, the glutes are tighter and drier than Nick's. The glute hamstring tie-in is tighter and drier than Nick's. But again, Nick has that overwhelming size that still draws your eye to Nick. But the back double bicep shot is another good example of how I believe Nick looked really good from a conditioning standpoint in New York. For him, for a guy of his size, for a mass monster, his conditioning was good. But it's going to need to be better at the Arnold. And so far, it looks like it is going to be, but he is going to need to be better than the New York Pro to really be competitive in this lineup. And the back double bicep shot is a good indicator of that, really, when compared to William Bonac. Now, if you flip them around from the front again and you go to a most muscular pose, you can still kind of see what I mean. Bonac has that finer detail, those finer lines in his physique. Look at the striations in his chest. You can see some striations even in his tricep there, in his quads. Even though Nick has these crazy vascular quads, these crazy vascular legs, really, his entire leg looks crazy. In his midsection, which is another good thing about his midsection, a lot of people criticize his blockiness, which is something that people criticize about both Bonac and Nick. Neither of these guys are the most aesthetic bodybuilder. They are shorter, they are blockier, they are heavily muscled on a short frame. That's just what happens. But if you compare midsections, I think Nick's is better than Bonac's. He's got those deep, really deep and big ab muscles that really stand out and pop much more than Bonac's do, making his midsection not look as bad or as blocky because it is so defined and his abs are so prominent, especially when crunched down in the most muscular like that. But again, if you look at Bonac's physique and compare it to Nick's, you can see a lot more of those finer details in the pose, which I think is going to be something, like I said, Nick needs to improve upon for the Arnold Classic if he wants to beat these guys, which I think there is a potential that he does beat Bonac. There is a potential that Nick could be second instead of third. In fact, let's go over to a front double bicep here. Akim Williams versus Nick Walker. And by the way, Akim was 6th and Bonac was 5th at last year's Olympia. I really think that this is going to be Akim's year, and he is going to finally move past Bonac. Bonac barely beat him last year, in my opinion, 5th and 6th. I think this is going to be the year he surpasses Bonac, and I think he's going to do it at the Arnold Classic. And what I mean so if you look at Nick and you look at Bonac and you look at Nick and you look at Akim, Nick is kind of in between Akim and Bonac. Bonac is shorter, blockier, densely muscled. Akim is taller than Nick, bigger than Nick, but also more aesthetic than Nick, but not as shredded as Bonac. Bonac is more shredded. Akim is bigger and not as shredded. But I think if you actually look at Nick's physique, he was in a little bit sharper condition than Akim was. So look, if you go back to Nick versus Bonac, let's look at a side shot here because we haven't really looked at any good side shots yet. A side chest here. This is another example. Nick looks massive from the side. He looks really good from the side. But you can see, and I don't know if this is entirely, some of this might be lighting, but you can see a lot of the finer details on Bonac's physique. The striations on his chest, some of the detail in his arms and shoulders. Look at the lower body. The glute hamstring tie-in, the detail and separation in his legs, even in his calves. It's superior to what Nick has there, and that's what we're going to see from Nick, and that's why this Arnold Classic is going to be such a test for him, because it's one thing to win the New York Pro in what I think was a fairly competitive show, but it was not on the level of an Arnold Classic or an Olympia. The Arnold Classic is going to have the best of the best. William Bonac is one of the best of the best. Akim Williams, one of the best of the best. These guys are top Olympia placers. This is a different lineup for Nick than the New York Pro was. Now, some of the updates that we've seen from Nick so far, he does look like he's sharper and he's further along now in this prep than he was at this point in his New York prep. That's fantastic. But I do think it's going to need to be significantly sharper looking at these comparisons for him to be competitive in that top 3. I still think he's going to land in the top 3. But a lot of people were even questioning in my prediction video why I didn't have Nick winning the show. And I'm kind of trying to explain that with this video because Bonac is a good example of those finer details that even though Nick wasn't in bad shape in New York, he was in good shape. Like I said, that was a good conditioned version of Nick. But just remember for a second, this is only Nick's second year as a pro. That was his second pro show ever. There are still some things like on the top level of bodybuilding that guys like Bonac, this detail that they have, there's a reason why they play so highly for so many years. Bonac's been at the top for a long time because they can bring that finer detail in a little bit finer conditioning. But let's go to a side shot here of Nick and Akim because like I said, I think Nick and Akim are a very similar comparison, just like Nick and Bonac are. Just in the sense that they're both kind of mass monsters, and their conditioning is a little bit more comparable. Go back to the front double bicep is what I want to go back to show off the aesthetics that Akim has for such a big guy. This is something that Nick doesn't have as much. We acknowledge Nick is a freak. We acknowledge he's a mass monster, but we also acknowledge he doesn't have the prettiest physique. Akim is a mass monster. He's gigantic, but he has a beautiful physique, a beautiful V-taper, an X-frame for a guy of his size, which is something that I think is a massive advantage over Nick Walker because, like I said, one of the things that draws your eyes to Nick is the size. But your eyes are also going to be drawn to a guy that is the size of Akim that also has a pretty elegant structure. Look at the lats from the front. The small waist, the giant flaring quads, the X-frame, the massive arms. He's got everything that Nick has, but on a better frame, essentially, but comparable conditioning. So I think Nick's physique is kind of somewhere in between the two, and maybe that means Akim wins, Nick comes in second, and Bonac is in third. But right now, my prediction is Akim winning, Bonac in second, and Nick in third. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think. How do you think Nick is going to place? Do you think he can win the show? What do you think about these comparisons? As always, give the video a thumbs up. Give it a like if you enjoyed the video. It's free, it's easy, and it helps out the channel tremendously. Subscribe if you have not subscribed yet already. As always, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out.